Welcome, everyone, to the Serious Angler podcast. I'm your host, Bailey Egbert, and today we have a special show for you guys. Today's episode isn't just any other Serious Angler episode. It's the first one that kicks off a new segment here at Serious Angler that if you listen to the last show of 2024, you got a little sneak peek of, and that is today's episode 1 of the Real Biology. And typically, you're used to hearing me lead the way on this show, but in this segment here at Real Biology, we have a different voice and a different person that's going to be leading the way, and it's one that is much smarter than me. And but he needs no introduction to any of the Serious Angler fam. That is Mr. Stephen Bardin. And it's an exciting journey we're barking on here down on the Real Biology. But I think there's no better than Mr. Steve Bardin here himself to kind of give you guys a little bit more details on what's to come here at the Real Biology. Steve, welcome, man.
Bailey, thank you for the welcome to the Serious Angler Network. Here we are, episode 1 of Real Biology. This has been something you've had to drag me through since probably one of our first conversations. You said let's do a podcast, and I said I want to do a podcast, and yet we're 2 years down the road, and we're finally doing it.
We're here.
2025 is going to be a big year. We're going to have a lot of cool guests, but Real Biology is born 11 years ago. 11 years ago, back before people were on social media talking about science and fish, that's what I was doing. I was building a company, my private lake management company, and I started using the hashtag Real Biology in 2014, and it was a way for me to catalog ideas of I'm trying to teach science to anglers, and hopefully that makes us better anglers, but it also makes us better scientists because it's two-part conversation. And today, our very first guest to the show embodies exactly what I hoped Real Biology would become. But even more important, I think you're going to learn, Bailey, the guy that we have on this very first show is actually the first what we would call like fishing celebrity that engaged with me on social media. He saw the post. He started to have that conversation. I can't wait to bring him on. It's gonna be really cool first episode. Before we get to that, I do owe you a big thank you, not just for dragging me along and doing the podcast, but you were one of the first people who invited me to do a podcast and really talk about science and angling, and opened up a whole community. And so, Serious Angler, truthfully, it's been the Real Biology home since day one. It always had to be here. I'm excited to be part of this team. Hopefully we can get Andrew here every once in a while. That would be cool. But I'm so glad that you're here to kind of lead the show and make sure that we're successful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm excited to be here for the fact of one, anytime we get you on the show or anytime, frankly, that we talk on the phone or in person, I learn something new from you. And so I get to sit back and kind of be a co-host, if you will, but more just to bring in all the knowledge and stuff that you guys are talking about, be a fishing nerd, and excited to hear the conversation that's to come, especially with our first guest for this segment as well. But man, it's been a long time coming, but we're here, and I think I'm not sure the folks are ready for the amount of knowledge and theoretical mic drop you're going to do on this talk here going forward for the first episode.
I mean, thanks to this first guest, which we are going to get to eventually, but thanks to this first guest, I know a ton of anglers. I know, thanks to my career, I know a ton of biologists, and these are true fish nerds that live it, breathe it. They do it on the local fisheries. That your audience, the Serious Angler audience, they're using these fisheries, and so it's going to be a great way for us to bridge the science, bridge the management. Hopefully, during these episodes, we get to hear a little bit about what I'm doing, but also what are other scientists doing, and you may even get into some nasty little debates between us. You're going to see it's going to be a fun process. I'm actually in a hotel room. Of course, first episode, I'm not even like at home in my office. I'm in a hotel room. I'm at the Texas chapter of American Fisheries Society annual meeting. I'm the president of Texas chapter American Fisheries. It's something that you get to do once in your entire career. And I chose the first night of the meeting to film the first episode of Real Biology.
Hey, perfect time, right?
I'm telling you.
Present. I love it.
Yep. So over the next 3 days, we're going to do some continuing education. I'm actually going to teach tomorrow uh, from 1 to 3 o'clock. I'm going to teach scientists how to use forward-facing sonar as part of their survey methods and drop a little bit of knowledge on what we've been doing in the private sector and see if that can help some of our agency folk. We're also going to have other biologists are going to do continuing education on like plant ID. We're going to have a service project. We're going to teach students some of the sampling methods we use in streams. And then we have 2 full days of presentations by students and professionals on the work that they're doing. So this is things that you present at a conference like this before you publish in a paper. So we get the inside information ahead of time. And we're going to learn what's going on in Texas over the next 2 days. So hopefully I can share some of that with the audience over the next coming months. What are the secrets that are going to be coming out?
That, I mean, you've already kind of hooked me in when you're talking about now with the biologists utilizing forward facing for their different methods and things like that. Like, I'm already glued in, and people that
Yeah.
have listened to your episodes before on Serious Angler have raved with feedback of what they've learned, and then with that have thrown multiple questions back at you that we'd love to ask you. Well, now they're going to have the opportunity to do that because this is going to be a bi-weekly show for the foreseeable future here on Serious Angler, and they're going to have the opportunity as well to have their questions directed straight to you, Steve.
Yep. One of the things that we said we had to do if we're going to build a podcast is we have to have the audience be able to ask questions. And my schedule is very hectic. So, although a lot of these episodes will be pre recorded or recorded live, we're going to set up something we're calling the Lake Hotline. And the Lake Hotline will be where they can get their questions answered by me, maybe me and the guest, maybe me and you. By the time we're done with this, you might be a scientist as well.
I don't know about that. I don't have much hope for that, but I don't think they want my answer.
Hey, I used to teach fisheries management and something called ichthyology. You'll learn what that is too. But I used to teach those. So if anybody can give you an honorary degree, maybe it's me.
Well, my position here on the show is exactly what I am, and it's just a dumb everyday angler. So I'm gonna every time I see the big terms for the other common folk, where I'll be my job is to help dumb it down for some folks like
All right.
me. So that's
Deal.
we're gonna have going forward, but that's exciting stuff, man. I'm really looking forward to that. And for the Lake Hotline folk, down in the description is email links, contacts where you guys can go and either reach out to us or Steve and have your questions submitted, and then we could potentially look to answer them on a show here in the future. So
I can't wait. That's going to be such a fun segment. Okay. Are you ready for our first guest?
let's bring them on.
All right. So listen, this guy, like I said, one of the first people that engaged with Real Biology, engaged with me on social media. We've been traveling the country together since day one. Like whenever we met, we became best friends. It's like stepbrothers. We're right there in the movie. Did we just become best friends? But also, he's been a huge mentor to me. He's helped me navigate this industry. Uh, we even own a business together now. So this guy, there was only one person that could be on episode one, and that is one of the greatest anglers of all time, professional angler Gary Klein.
Well, thank you very much for
Very
having me. Thank you. I tell you, just the thought of a podcast like this is very intriguing to me. I listened to Bailey throw a term out there, and I never really heard it, but I am a fishing nerd. I
Yeah.
mean, I've always been a fishing nerd ever since I was a little bitty runt. And what really drew me to Stephen was learning or reading what he was saying about something that I thought I knew, I was an expert on. And I knew fisheries, or at least I thought I did, until I started listening to Stephen. Then I was able to start asking Stephen questions. And I mean, even today when we drive, I mean, the conversations go for hours and hours and hours because I've got a million questions. And it's really neat for me as an angler that I've never had another occupation but competitive angling, but I've always seen it from the water up. Yeah, we got electronics to look into the water, but I never really understood everything and how everything's connected. And Stephen's taught me so much and continues to teach me. I mean, he's like my lifeline. if I have a question or if I see something, and there's always a really good explanation. And Stephen has this very unique ability to put things in simple terms so that an everyday angler like myself can really understand what it is he's trying to say. Now, he leads me a lot in trying to explain something that's a little bit more complicated. But when he lays it out and you see what he's trying to, the point he's trying to make, it's so clear. So Stephen is one of the best teachers I've ever been around. And, his seminars fascinate me. Every time he is talking on a subject, I'm always usually there on the front row listening because I'm learning as an angler. And in my entire career, I've been a user of the resource. Some fisheries are good, some fisheries are bad, whether, whatever. But what I'm learning from Stephen is, as fishing and this industry has evolved. I mean, you think about me in the beginning of my career, I started fishing full-time BASS in 1979 and literally go into communities and have people at the gas station say, "What kind of a boat is that you have? What are you here for?" "Well, I'm bass fishing." "Are there bass around here?" And they are sitting on one of the best bass fisheries in the entire world. But now, if you fast forward, we have so many users of that resource. Our resources now are getting more attention. Our fish now are getting more attention with very skilled anglers at all ages. I mean, look what's happened over the last 5 years with the new technology and the young anglers that are coming into play and competing. I mean, shoulder to shoulder with some of the best anglers in the world and defeating them on a regular basis. And I think some anglers look at that as a negative. I look at it as a positive because what it's done is our industry is evolving. We're getting more people interested in the sport, more users of the resource. But I think what you guys are trying to do with this podcast is dead on because we're trying to basically create a community. And that's what Stephen and I have been involved in for quite a few years now, to where we can start in this community connecting the dots quicker for people, give people an opportunity to have a direct link to have their questions answered or to develop a better understanding of what it is that they're experiencing. Because all reservoirs, all water bodies, whether it's natural or man-made or current, they're all going to cycle. I mean, some of the best reservoirs in the country, I've seen them go down to where nobody fishes them, and now they're one of the best reservoirs again. They all cycle. I've seen it with Rayburn, Toledo Bend, Gunnersville. I mean, all of your Great Lakes. I mean, not only a few years ago, I mean, a club tournament at Gunnersville would take 11 pounds to win, and hardly everybody wanted to fish it. But now it's come back to where if you really want to win an event, you've got to have upwards of 30 pounds. For 5 largemouth bass, a 30-pound stringer is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of anglers fish their entire careers and never get a chance to experience that. But our fishing across this country is getting better. There's more fish, there's better quality fish, even with the smallmouth. I mean, northern smallmouth, phenomenal now. It used to take 14 to 15 pounds to win. Now you got to have upwards of 25 pounds to even have an opportunity to win. So I'm saying that the water bodies that we have today are the same water bodies we're going to have 10 years from now or 15 years from now. Those are the same water bodies that I experienced 30 years ago. So it is up to us, this community, to maintain those fisheries, whether it's habitat or restocking. But I think the most important thing is for everybody to come together and create a good understanding of what it is that they're faced with. So I love what you guys are doing. Thank you for letting me be a part of it.
There you go. That's the whole show. Gary
There
got
it
it.
is. Yep.
Got it wrapped.
No.
It's so well said.
Episode 1.
Yeah. Can I add in one thing quick before you go, Steve? Is what you said there, Gary, about the conversations with that you've had with Steve. I've had so many conversations with Steve where it's like, why doesn't the masses know this? Well, they need to know this. They need to hear this. And that is the kind of feedback we've gotten when we've had him on Serious Angler and folks like yourself as well in the past. And that's kind of like what kind of started the foundation of like, hey, why don't we just start a podcast together? And that's really what kind of trickled into all of this. And this is the goal here, is so
We're,
that now the masses can get this conversation, this information more regularly now. And I think it's long overdue.
well, I'm like everybody in this industry. I've ran across a lot of people and met a lot of people, but what really drew me to Stephen Bardin, not only his knowledge, but the passion that he had for fisheries was just like the passion I have for fishing. Now, Stephen's a good fisherman too. Yeah, he likes to catch fish, but that right there is what really created that bond between us. We both have questions above the water and below the water. How can we make things better? How can we make not only fishing better, but how can we improve our fishing skills and get that out so people can enjoy the same things that we do.
I love it.
Exactly. This is exactly right. This is, and Bailey, I told you, if there's one angler that embodies real biology, it's Gary Klein. And I think, because we've traveled the country so much together, we've made trips to South Dakota and Iowa and Florida and Texas and Arizona. I mean, there's nowhere we haven't been together. Spent a lot of time in the truck together, and Gary's had the opportunity to meet a lot of the scientists that I know and experience what it takes to make a quality fishery. And I think whenever we start this conversation, probably the best place to do is go back to the history of bass fishing, Gary, and walk us through those early days. And I know you weren't part of the no live well days, but the earliest days of fishing BASS and traveling the country, really, what was fish care like back then?
Well, before I started fishing, they weighed them in on stringers. I mean, literally,
Right.
some of the earliest BASS competitions were all kill fit, and then they killed everything. They were
Yeah.
on
So if it's 30-pound stringer, we're talking, well, back then it was 10 fish, right? Or
15,
15.
15.
Yeah. So, it's a 45-pound stringer better. They're not growing. They're getting eaten.
Well, yeah, yeah, but again, though, just let me say this: from the '60s to where we are today, everything's evolved, and I think that's one of the things that this industry learned at a very early time is that we got to think about the future. And of course, Ray Scott led the way. He was starting out his organization, and then he learned real quick that you can't have a weigh-in and kill all the fish.
Right.
Because you bring that many people into a local community to fish their local lake, and then all the fish are in ice chests, that doesn't go over well. So Ray learned that at a very early time, catch and
Right.
release. And I
But
think
that decision is what allowed us to actually have a sport. Without that decision of catch and release, this thing would have been over quick.
exactly it would have. Well, in the very beginning for me, I was like any other young kid, born and raised in the outdoors. I loved to hunt and fish. Um, had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew I wanted to do something that would make me happy. And I had no idea how to make a living fishing or make a living hunting, which I love to do, until I was introduced with competitive angling. And that was in 1973 in Northern California. I observed my first bass fishing tournament and I was hooked. I mean, I gathered all the information from that organization and I started fishing their very next event and
Right.
continue to fish all the way through. But at some point, as I graduated high school and I had to advance, I wanted to go full time. So I left California and started traveling the country. This is where I started meeting all different anglers. And,
Mhm.
they're all good fishermen, we're all learning, but we were learning about techniques to catch the fish better.
Mhm.
And then when I first started fishing bass, it was a 7 fish limit and they went to a 5 fish limit
Okay.
because they were trying to preserve the fisheries. And I think a 5 fish was what they settled because of the live wells that they were using at the time. They weren't even aerated very well. And we lost a lot of those fish. So we had tremendous improvements with the manufacturers of the bass boats, came out with bigger live wells, stronger pumps, aeration systems, air systems to really manage these fish. And I think that was a huge impact.
Right. So at the time, the late 70s, early 80s, who was talking about fish care? Who was teaching Gary Klein? You have 7 fish in a live well. What do you do with them? Who was telling you what to do, or was it just trial and error?
Well, it was trial and error, but the biggest thing that was teaching me about how to keep my fish alive was the fact that I would get penalized if I brought a dead fish to the scales.
Right.
So, and back then it was only a 2-ounce penalty. But there's been many events in my career where I've lost first place by 2 ounces or less.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was really a determining factor to where us as anglers had to learn how to take better care of our fish so we didn't lose that dead fish weight as a penalty.
Right. So it's mainly driven by losing fish weight. That's what's making us make those decisions with a live well. But let's fast forward 10 years. You've learned how to do it. What are some of the signs that the fish give you that things aren't going great in the live well?
They're belly up.
They tell you when they die.
That doesn't look good at all. Well, usually you'll have a real stressed fish. They change colors. They do lay on their sides. They can't keep themselves upright due to either they're not doing very well or their bladders are bloated. And back then we didn't have the tools or the knowledge to, deflate the fish properly without killing the fish. But basically it was just checking your live wells. The biggest thing for the anglers is to make sure your live wells were running, bringing fresh water in as much as you could.
Okay. And then do you remember the first time that you made the decision to put some ice in a live well?
Yeah.
How'd it go?
Well, the first time I ever attempted to put ice in a live well is I put 3 bags of ice in one live well with 5 fish. And they became very lethargic and very stiff. That didn't go over well at all because I changed the temperature too quick on them. I instantly dropped them and I put them into shock. And then everything on them starts turning red. The end of their fins are red, their gills. I mean, it just looked terrible.
Right.
But yeah, that's not the proper way to do that. But again, for me, it's all been trial and error. I've never had a manual. I've never had anybody telling you, hey, do this, do that. There's been, over the years, people have tried to come up with a system. But to me, the best system has always been run your live wells the whole time. Never put it on a timer, always run it live all the time.
Right. Yeah. And now the new best system is the catch, weigh, and release format that you so famously brought to the market.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't know that story, especially whenever we go back to Texas Fest. So can you give us the history, the true Gary Klein history of how did catch, weigh, and release even become a thing?
Well, how it became a thing is at the time I was president of an organization called the PAA.
When you say at the time, when was this, Gary?
God, man, I don't remember dates.
Okay.
Whenever the first Texas Toyota Big Bass Classic was held, and Kelly Jordan came to me and asked me if we could do something, because what happened with that is they had a sponsor, and it was Gulf States Toyota, and they wanted to have a public event on the best bass fishery in the state of Texas, and that was Lake Fork. And at the time, that was Lake Fork's, or Texas Parks and Wildlife. Lake Fork was their trophy lake.
Right.
And they never permitted an event on that lake. And it was a slot limit lake, under and over. But they wanted to hold this event. So KJ came to me, said, hey, what could we do with the PAA in having this event? So I actually was working with Phil DeRocher and Dave Terry. And Dave Terry and I became real close friends because we were talking on the phone every day. But I asked Dave, what do you need in a tournament weigh-in format that we could bring to the public and they would accept it and allow us to have this event?
And hold on, pause right there. For the audience to know, Phil DeRocher is a Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist and eventually became a director and is in our Texas Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame. And Dave Terry is also a fisheries biologist, became head of research, and is now the bass conservation director for the state of Texas. Both excellent fisheries biologists, but that's who's Gary's working with right there. Go ahead, Gary. Sorry.
And it took me about a week. I was working with two individuals with the PAA, Mike Otten and Gene Ellison. And Mike actually came up with the idea of how we could catch fish, weigh them, and release them without bringing them into a weigh-in. So he already had that idea on the table. What I did is I took that idea and modified it and made it doable, because at the time we had no certified scale. So what would we weigh these fish on so that everybody would be the same?
Right.
And I contacted a company, it's called Boga Grips, and they had certified Boga Grip scales that you just hang the fish on and it gave you the weight, but it gave you the weight in 4-ounce increments.
Okay.
That's the reason why we ended up using the Boga Grip with 4-ounce increments on it for the first Gulf States Toyota event.
Okay.
I put together the format of the event, called Dave Terry and said, hey, this is what I have. He loved it. Catch, weigh, release. The weight of the fish went on a scorecard, and then they would radio it into the headquarters, and they had a huge Jumbotron TV set up where all the activities were taking place. So the anglers or the audience could see what was being caught in real time.
And this was team or individual?
No, this was team.
Teams.
This
okay.
was team, correct, yeah. I broke it down. If you really want me to get into it,
yes, we want the details.
Well, I had
168
PAA members, and this event was put together by the PAA working with Gulf States Toyota and Texas Parks and Wildlife. So I had the number 168 to work with, and I wanted to include the entire membership of the PAA.
Mm-hmm.
So what I ended up doing was 4-man teams. So I ended up with 42 4-man teams, which even allowed us to take the format even one step further. So what I did is we did a morning session and an afternoon session with a transfer in the middle of the day. So 4 guys were picked on a team. We did it as a random drawing. And then those 4 guys had a team captain. And the rules of the game were 2 anglers in the boat at a time, and the other 2 stood on the bank.
Okay.
And then when they came in, I think we had a 30-minute turnaround where those guys could all go huddle in a team meeting and talk about their day, talk about where they were catching the fish and where they need to go or not go. And then the afternoon, that group went and fished. Now, the difference is that on the second day, you could change your team around, whether you went in the morning or in the afternoon, or if you changed anglers in the boat. So I really left a lot of decisions up to the team captain for that team. And it was a 2-day total, running total of every scoreable fish that was caught. And that's
amazing. Bailey, don't you wish we had that? Don't you wish we had the live stream of
that? Yeah, 100%. That'd be. I think everybody would be lining up to watch that.
Yeah, and every one of the Gulf States Toyota Big Bass Classics that have been held in the state of Texas have all been catch, weigh, release with that original format.
Yeah, this is amazing. And this is the history. People, you think about Toyota, such a big brand in fishing. Where did that come from? It came from this conversation with Gulf States building this event, the catch, weigh, and release format. I sent out the lifeline. Hopefully Dave or KJ will tell me what year that was. We'll get that before the end of the show, I'm sure. One of them will know. So that event was kind of the beginning of catch, weigh, and release. And then, of course, you are co-founder of Major League Fishing. So tell us a little bit about how you took that, you adapted it to Major League Fishing, those originals, cups, especially on Amistad.
Yeah, that was our original event. And I think that was 2011 when we had that original event.
So Dave Terry texts Gary. He says, It was 2007 is when you actually held the event. So 2006 is when you were planning that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, I know it was a few years ago. But you know, Dave was a big part of that, because when I laid the format out to Dave, because I knew that Dave was going to have to take and sell that to Phil DeRocher and to the public. So Dave Terry came to Lake Fork, and we had a town hall meeting with all the locals. And we presented this format in a town hall meeting at Lake Fork, and they loved it.
Yeah.
Catch, ray, release. It was really a cool deal. So that established the Toyota Big Bass Classic. And Dan Freakin, who is the owner of Gulf States Toyota, was the big part of that. I mean, that's the reason why that whole event took place. And Dan Freakin was also a big supporter of Texas Parks and Wildlife. So
Right.
that was an avenue for him to support Texas Parks and Wildlife and the good work that they do in their fisheries. So that right there was really a good thing. So move forward a few years. I believe it was at the 2011 Bassmasters Classic at Shreveport,
2010.
2010.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Boyd Duckett and I were sitting in the parking lot, two fishermen, spooling line. You know, we're always talking about, dang, man, I wish we could do this, or I wish it was like this, or I wish, you know, we could change things. Now, mind you, 2010, I had been fishing BASS since 1979.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with bass. I grew up with Ray Scott and his whole format and how successful he was.
Mm-hmm.
But I continue to think about the future of where we are today with so many users of the resource, so many events that are taking place across this country. But now we got high school, we got college, all on the same water bodies.
Right.
You know, where we used to have one event a year or every 2 years, now there's 30, 40, 50 events or more on that same water body every year. So there's a lot of pressure. So when Boyd and I were having this conversation, you know, days on, he goes, well, let's try something. He said, do you think we could put together a group of anglers that would buy into us creating a more of a sports format? And maybe we can try to sell it as more of a sports than a hobby. So we did. I got on the phone and I started calling a few anglers, you know, and I ended up with 15 anglers that said, yes, let's do something. So we all invested, put some money up,
Right.
and created the Bass Pro Tour.
The cups.
Major League Fishing hadn't been born yet. So we were going to try to market this, and we tried for a year, and it never went anywhere. I mean, we couldn't get the first person to bite on it at all. So Boyd and I continued to think what we needed a media company behind us. And during this process, there was an individual that we had hired to represent the PBT and try to sell it. And we had him employed for a year, and it just never went anywhere. So we relieved him of that duty. Now we didn't have anybody. And in one of our meetings, I was thinking about Don Rux. Don Rux was the CEO at Bassmasters, and you know he wasn't there any longer. So I made a phone call to Don to see if he would want to hear our spiel, our pitch, and he did. So he asked me if he could bring Jim Wilburn along, and Jim Wilburn, to all of us in the industry, knows that he's one of the top salespeople in the industry, if not the top salesperson. So when Jim and Don showed up at my hotel room in Muskogee, Oklahoma, during a BASS event, I was rooming with Shaw Grigsby. And when they came to the hotel room and we started this conversation, Boyd could not make that meeting. So it was just us. I learned real quick that there was way more to discuss than just in a hotel room at night, and I'm trying to fish the next day. So we had a short meeting. After the event was over, then Boyd and I flew to Oklahoma and sat down with Jim and Don, laid out everything that we had, the vision that we had, and that was When we got them on our team to market, then the next thing I knew, we were on a plane flying to Canada to meet up with the head CEO of the Outdoor Channel at the time. And we pitched our concept of, or not Major League Fishing, Bass Pro Tour. We didn't really have it named yet. We hadn't even shot a pilot yet. And they bought into it.
Yeah.
Because the timing was everything. At that time, the Outdoor Channel was number one in hunting. They wanted to become number one in fishing. So it was just a perfect marriage for us to partner with the Outdoor Channel. And Roger Warner was the head CEO at the time, bought into it, and they were a great partner. That gave us the funding and the media behind us to go ahead and schedule our first cup event in 2011 or 10 on Lake Hampstead.
Yeah.
That event for me was kind of a very telling moment, a very telling week, because I had all of our anglers there. They had never lived the format. What happened is that when we were on the plane flying back to Alabama from Canada, Boyd looked over at me and he said, "You know that format you keep telling me that you've got? You better write it down. We need to get to work on it," which I did. It was easy for me because I already had everything laid out. I'd already done something similar with the Toyota Big Bass Classic.
Right.
I had to kind of tweak it a little bit, but I wrote the format for Major League Fishing in 30 minutes. And once I wrote the format, the rules were easy for me to write.
Right.
But what I wanted to do is I wanted to change the way anglers compete. And if you look at my background, where I was raised from, to, I evolved with the traditional tournament fishing scene. What I don't like about regular tournaments is you have a morning blast off and everybody's racing across the lake trying to get to their spot. That's when you tear your equipment up, you have accidents, et cetera, especially in large fields. And then the other thing I didn't like is the fact that at the end of the day, you finally get a bite going and you have to leave that area to run all the way back to a weigh-in.
Mm-hmm.
Again, these are angler or decisions that an angler can't make. And plus, I wanted to really elevate catch-weigh release. I wanted to make that the new norm in competitive angling because to me, that was the future of fishing, was catch-weigh release. Well, the first event that we had at Hampstead, I had written the format, I had submitted the format, and I wanted everybody to, when they played the game, I talked to every guy. At the end of the round, what'd you think? What'd you think? What'd you think? And the one thing that all of them said was, "Holy cow. That is the most intense format that I have ever competed under." Because the other thing we did with the real-time leaderboard is in traditional tournament fishing, you can have a great day. Maybe you're catching a ton of 3-pounders, best fishing day you've had. But all you're really doing is catching enough to get behind because you don't know how you stand with your other competitors. With our format, you know every fish that's being caught. So you can make adjustments on the water, whether you need to go shallow, go deep, or catch bigger fish, or, hey, you're doing pretty good, just keep doing what you're doing. So that real-time information is what drove, that heightened competitiveness, during the course of the day. And the other thing is that the way I laid the format out is in Major League Fishing, even today, the format's changed very little. All you're doing is competing to advance.
Mm-hmm.
Real day is the championship round, but you have to get through the qualifying rounds to make it to the championship round. So it adds so many elements of strategy. You can be way out in the lead. Why burn those fish? Now you can go practicing, and, if you get behind, you can run back and start catching more fish. So again, everything's evolved, but the more that the anglers experienced that push with the Major League Fishing format, I mean, it's pretty intense.
Now, where did you said you wrote the rules? Where did fish landing violations? Where did that come from?
The fish landing violation was actually a rule that I did not come up with. Okay.
Okay.
It was a rule that we implemented after we started airing our TV shows. Because again, I watch all the videos, I read all the comments. And one comment that became very clear to us was, oh man, a fish flopping on the carpet or banging it on the console. We received more comments about fish care than anything else about the TV show or that we were showing on TV. So we knew that we were going to have to make that a focal point. And that's why we came up with the fish landing violation.
Okay.
It's a 2-minute penalty, but it's still probably the most used penalty in our competitive format is a fish landing violation. Because we had guys that would lose a fish and it's flopping on the boat and they put their foot on it. Or an angler that would catch a big one and just bear hug it and wipe all the slime off of it while they're, taking the hook out of it. So we wanted to become leaders with fish care. So we made that adjustment in the rule.
That's great. No, that's great. And then one thing, I was a fan of Major League Fishing. I watched the Cups. Bailey, you probably are the same way. Watch the Cups. It was must-watch TV. But then I knew Gary Klein, and one time I sent you a text, and I said, what information does the official collect? And that started you and I down a really slippery slope, and has developed into a lot of work for myself and yourself and learning. But tell me a little bit about, from behind the scenes, Major League Fishing. I know the answers, but tell me a little bit about what is the official doing besides just collecting a weight and watching for fish landing violations?
Well, in the beginning, that's all they did is they enforced the rules of the competition during that round, which was 3 2.5-hour periods of competition. And again, we incorporated the fish landing violation, but the rules were written in such a manner that I allowed the angler that's competing to make decisions on their own. For example, again, if you look at the rules and you look at where my upbringing came from, it's very easy to see I did away with the things I didn't like. For example, if you have a fish on and he's hung on a brush around a boat dock or underneath a log, why can't the angler go get that fish? Even if he has to leave the boat, he can go get that fish. Maybe he has to wade across a stump field or something to get to the fish. But instead of breaking that fish off and leaving the lure in its mouth, we allow anglers to go get those fish. Hey, it's a 5-minute penalty. It's an out of the boat penalty, but still you get the weight of that fish. And all of the rules that we enforce are just time penalties. They're not weight reductions. And in doing that, the angler can make his own decisions. And that's, one of the rules I had was 2 lines in the water. I mean, how many times you make a long cast of the Carolina rig and they come up schooling over here? You just drop the rod and pick another rod up and fire it over there and catch those fish instead of having to reel it all the way back in. Again, trying to give the angler the opportunity to make their own decisions.
Okay, so the official became an arbiter of the rules. He was enforcing the rules. But then for our side, the official started collecting data on what the angler was actually doing. For us, in the background, not on the scorecard, but in the actual app, they started collecting things about the fish, like species and the depth that you guys were catching them in. Really interesting information that might be useful to a fisheries professional. And you and I had done some electrofishing. You've came out on my electrofishing boat. You've experienced what kind of data we collect. And that's really where you and I started building a program together, is because Major League Fishing is, and the number of fish that you guys would catch during an event was a great data collection tool for fisheries managers. And it was fun the first time you and I drove to Tulsa and we met with Don and Jim and started talking about it. I could tell that they had no idea what you and I were bringing them, and the impact that Major League Fishing could have on fisheries agencies. But we fast forward to today, and we have the Major League Fishing Fisheries Management Division, and that division, uh, we've collected 170,000 fish catches over Major League Fishing's history, and we've provided those fish catches to the state agencies. And because of that, you've had the ability to meet now these professionals, travel with me to professional conferences. I tell biologists, like new biologists that come into fisheries management, I tell them all the time, there were two times when you really wanted to be a fisheries biologist. The first was in the 50s and 60s, early 70s, when we were building reservoirs and we were doing the experimental phase, where you could do something like take peacock bass and stock them into a reservoir in central Texas just to see if they would live. They were doing those kind of things, Bailey, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. They were moving Florida bass around and trying to see how big they could grow them. It was like the heyday of being a fishery scientist until now. Now is now the next best time, because now we have technology, we have more users, we have a greater amount of sharing of information, but we also have universally this problem of the fishing industry is aging, the reservoirs are aging, and it's all happening at the same time. And fisheries managers truly have to manage fisheries today. So I want to shift a little bit, Gary, and talk about the management of our fisheries today from your perspective as an angler. Tell me, are just black and white, are fisheries better today than they were at the beginning of your career, or are they worse?
Without a doubt, they're better.
Better today.
They're better today. We have more fish, better quality fish. Guys are catching bigger stringers, a lot of bigger fish. Let me back up to what you were saying earlier, because
Yep.
Everything's evolved. It's going to continue to evolve. The conversation that you and I started when we first met is a conversation that is still ongoing between us. For betterment, for improvement. How can we streamline it? How can we create a community of fisheries so that everybody's connected? At the beginning, like when I created Major League Fishing, the catch, ray, release format, I had no idea the magnitude of what it could have, what it could be, what it is going to be when I did that. I was, again, because I didn't know what you knew. And when you and I met and you started asking me those questions about, hey, what information does the officials collect? I'm thinking, well, the time, the species, and the bait it was caught on. It was pretty basic. And then the next question you asked me is, what do you guys do with that information? And I'm like, man, I have no idea. We're just collecting it. And you're the one that got that conversation started where, hey, what you guys are doing is phenomenal. Do you realize that when an MLF event comes to a water body, you collect more fish data in 1 week than that local state agency can collect in 10 years?
Right.
And the numbers are huge. So again, that conversation still continues as we build this community. But what I see and what I like is all of the fish catch data that we have, in the way you have organized it in the state folders that we have, in the way you've made that information accessible to any agency. They can come to you, or come to us, go to their state folder, and there's all the catch data from all the events that we've had in their state.
Mm-hmm.
And that's huge. And to be able to talk to this state agency about things that work, things that don't work. For example, the conference that you and I just attended in Arizona, we had a lot of the Western fisheries that were represented. I think we had 27 state agencies, or there was quite a few.
There's quite a few, yeah.
But during those presentations, they were showing the projects that they had. They're proud of them because, these are ongoing projects that's taken months and months and months, or these are annual projects that are ongoing. But one thing that struck me is that each state agency or each group did things a little bit different. They used different materials. They had different ways and means of using the equipment, deploying different types of structures. That's the community that I think we're starting to educate and bring together so that a state agency that wants to do a program doesn't have to waste a lot of time and effort that doesn't really work.
Right.
Because now they have access to all the programs that really work.
Right. We'll talk about what really works from your perspective as an angler with a long enough career that you've seen things change. Give me a list of things that you see state agencies or biologists do that you just think are gold standard and they work.
That the state agencies do. First of all, the big difference between a public water body and a private water body is the fact a lot of our agencies, their hands are tied because they have to manage that water body for all anglers, which means multiple species. That's hard to do. Where a private water body, which I've experienced that with you, you manage that water body to what the owner wants.
Right.
And it may not even be fish.
Yeah.
You deal with that all the time. But the state agencies, I think, are getting better at communicating with the local anglers. That communication, I think, is being really driven by a lot of the habitat builds because they need manpower.
Okay.
I see a lot of the high schools that are being involved. You and I have worked with a lot of the high schools. Fishing teams will come out and help us build that. So they're educating their community about what it is they're doing to their local water body. I think that's huge. Where in the past, I don't think that communication is as good as what it is today.
Okay.
Now, as far as their fish management, I think they're more in tune now with trying to stay ahead of what, instead of kind of waiting for something to happen, they're more proactive and trying to stay ahead of the curve with their research, with their knowledge, and everything in this community now that they have access to.
Yeah, I love that. So as an angler, let me flip the coin on you. What in your community? What's the advice that you would give other anglers who want to become more knowledgeable, want to participate? How do they work with their local biologist or whatever it might be to either A, become a better angler, or B, to improve their fisheries?
Well, all of your local biologists you have access to them. I mean, like here in the state of Texas, you can go to Texas Parks and Wildlife and you can run down the region and the biologist that's over those water bodies. Send them an email, reach out to them. Hey, I've got a group of guys. What can we do to offer help?
Right.
I think that's huge, and start that conversation because a lot of biologists, God, you look at all the water bodies that they have to manage. Some of them are overwhelmed. They have so many water bodies. So I think that's the biggest thing is open up the communication, introduce yourself to them, go out of your way.
Yeah, love that. Bailey, you got anything for Gary?
I think
I'm gonna
that's
put you on
perfectly
the
well
spot,
said, especially on, and it's honestly a breath of fresh air hearing that. One, backtracking a little bit to saying that it's the fisheries are better now than years back from in Gary's career. That's a nice thing to hear, at least for me. I think for a lot of anglers that's a great thing to hear because you're like, okay, we are doing something right, and it does have some restore some faith in some agencies, we'll say state agencies. But I think when you talk about the communication between anglers, I think that is one that was the first thing that came to my mind anyway. That now I don't have the knowledge base of what works for a lot of states and fisheries like you guys would obviously. But it seems like the states that the anglers feel like their voice is being heard, it seemed to be the states that are doing well with their fisheries and the health of those fisheries. But no, this has been incredible to hear kind of not only one the fishing nerd of like why the you guys implemented what you did with Major League Fishing, but also to hear it of from an angler standpoint of why the decisions you guys made, what you made. is cool to hear the ins and outs of it, especially from the cup events. Cup events, our team here at Serious Anglers talked about it at length, and we think the cup events have probably been the best thing from a competitive standpoint in all of bass fishing. Wish there was more of them. Wish those were live. Like
Yeah.
it's an incredible format. So it's cool to hear the different aspects of where that came from. But in regards to the questions, man, now this has been awesome to kind of sit back and kind of soak it all in. You're doing well, host Steve. You're
Oh,
doing
thank
well
you,
for
thank
the
you.
first episode.
Yeah, I really appreciate y'all being so kind. This is an easy one.
Well,
And the Gary Klein you're getting is the exact same Gary Klein I get in the truck when we travel. The stories, a lot of them, they don't change. So whenever he's telling you the honest truth that he would tell me in private about all this stuff. And one of the things I knew he would say that fisheries were better today, because I've asked him that question multiple times in multiple ways. And there's no reason besides determined management that our fisheries are better, because our reservoirs are aging, and the aging process, people have listened to me, listened to Gary in the past, they know this. Whenever you put a dam and it starts blocking a waterway and you start collecting water, that water carries silt, it carries sediment, it carries everything that's in the watershed. And slowly over time, our reservoirs are aging, and that process means they're accumulating silt. The habitat within them is reducing or being buried. And then the nutrient that's coming in from our watersheds are making them more fertile, which leads to harmful algal blooms and so many things that make reservoirs less productive with time. But then to hear an angler that truly travels this country and lives it and is a fish nerd just like us say that they're better today means that our management is working across this country. And we truly don't give the scientists, the biologists that are doing that everyday work enough credit for putting in the right systems and doing exactly what Gary said, and going from reactive management of the past to proactive management.
I love that. I guess I would have one question to pitch over. And I know we've talked about this before, Steve, but I love to pitch it over to you, Gary. Is when we're talking about states that and people listening to this, they hear that the state agencies that communicate well with anglers. And I'm sure we've heard it all too often, especially in your travel, Gary. And I hear it. I mean, amongst some of my local boat ramps, where you might hear people complaining about their state agency, or why the lake's fishing bad this way, or why so and so is why they're spraying this or whatever. For somebody that wants to get in touch with their state agency, what is the best route to do so? And that way they feel like their voice is being heard, but also it's going into the right chain of communication, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll take it, Gary, if you want, for just a second.
yeah.
He kind of mentioned something in there where now we have the resource of the websites, and to know which region your reservoir falls in or your water body falls in is so important. To know which region you are within the state, and then actively look up who's that biologist. And I want to add to Bailey's question: what is the best approach, Gary? What questions do you ask? How do you approach those conversations whenever you get that person?
Oh, well, when I get that person, I just have a great conversation, because most of the biologists are fishermen. They're outdoors people, and they want the best fishing, that they can produce or be a part of. As an angler, though, I'm always intrigued with what they do and how they do it. Electroshocking, habitat. I like to hear their stories too, because this one thing I've learned about fisheries biologists like yourself, Stephen, your community has a passion for fishing. And it's just not catch with a rod and reel. They have a passion for the fishery itself, and how to improve it, whether it's habitat or stockings or whatever it takes. Like, for example, I think probably for anglers like myself, the most important piece of information I can say is educate yourself. Because I've always thought that if I saw a spray boat or something like that, man, that's negative. That's negative. But over my travels with you, I've learned that spraying is not as negative as what most bass anglers want to make it. By using the right chemicals to spray. And I've seen the work that you've done, and it's amazing. And it didn't harm the fishing at all. So I would just challenge the anglers to educate themselves a little bit. And you can do that by talking to your local biologist. What is it that you're doing on our reservoirs? And, how can I help you? Do you need manpower?
Right.
And then spread that word to where everybody, that information is getting easier to gather than it was, a few years ago or even, 10 years ago. And what we're trying to do is make that information readily available, easy access, so somebody can educate themselves quicker than
Mhm.
what I was educated, until I
Yeah.
found you. until I found you.
Well, hopefully, if they're listening to the show, they understand that education part is so important. Hopefully, if you're tuning into Real Biology, you're not here because you were wondering if Gary knows how to flip a jig or not.
Exactly. Well, I grew up, and when I started, all of my focus was lines, lures, knots, trolling motors, electronics, bass boats, big engines, and the bass. But I always thought of the bass before, summer, fall, winter, spring, their migrations, shallow and deep, and the tools that I had to learn in order to catch that same population of fish 12 months out of the year. So that's what I've always been pushing and learning, pushing and learning. But when you start understanding the environment that the fish live in and
Mhm.
understand how that environment affects the personality of the fish, man, you just start becoming a better angler with that better understanding to where you love the challenges when, the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour, or it's raining, or it's cold, or it's super hot. Fish don't leave the water body. They just change. And you have to be an educated angler or educated enough to make the right changes with your techniques and your lure presentations to catch those fish. That's where I try to excel. That's my expertise. But then since I've been involved with, the fisheries management division, Stephen, my career now is not only I love to catch the fish, but God, I want to ensure that our fisheries in the future are just as good as they were for me years ago. Because those anglers that are new or the anglers that are just, maybe wanting to buy a rod and reel and go fishing, I want them to have the same experience that I've had. Catch five that weigh 45, catch 12 pounders, 10 pounders, have good times on the water. I mean, I can't tell you how many 100 fish days I have even today on these water bodies, a true 100
Right.
fish. You and I've had them, where we put the boat on the trailer and we just look at each other and go, wow, how can you top a day that we just had? Everything was
Mhm.
right. The fish were biting. I want people to have that opportunity also, and that's one of the reasons why we're so heavily involved now with, Friends of Reservoirs, which is a great organization that it's nonprofit, great organization, but it's a website to go to and educate yourself about how you or your group can become involved in your local water bodies in doing projects that benefit these aging reservoirs. And
Right.
we're running that sweepstakes right now, so you can talk
No,
about
Gary,
it.
why don't you tell them about your sweepstakes? I do have another question, so I'm going to come back to it in a minute. But you tell them about your sweepstakes that you're doing with Friends of Reservoirs. This is new news to Bailey too.
Okay. Well, what I've put together is I'm trying to raise the awareness of Friends of Reservoirs and the good work that they do across this country, all different states. It's available to anybody. Just go to the Friends of Reservoirs website, and in trying to create this awareness, I'm actually running a sweepstakes. And we just started the sweepstakes this week. It's going to run until April the 5th. It's free. All you have to do is go to Friends of Reservoirs, go to the website, hit on the sweepstakes icon, and just fill out the information. And we're going to do a drawing, and we're going to announce the winner at our championship day at Red Crest in April. I think it's April the 5th or 6th in Huntsville, Alabama. That winner will win a trip with me on a lake of their choosing. So if they have a local water body and they've always wondered how to fish it different, then I will drive to wherever the winner is and take them and a guest fishing. So I'll take two individuals in the boat for the day, and I'll meet them anywhere in the country they want to go.
That sounds
That's
like a
awesome.
heck of a deal, Bailey.
That sounds like I'm going to be getting in on that.
Yeah, go to Friends of Reservoirs. You can't miss it.
Yeah, friendsofreservoirs.com. Friends of Reservoirs is the nonprofit arm of the Reservoir Fish Habitat Partnership. And Reservoir Fish Habitat Partnership is part of the National Fish Habitat Partnership. And these are great organizations that are built around improving our fisheries, whether it's fish passage, it's Western fish species, or it's reservoir management. They're trying to improve our reservoirs by doing on-the-ground projects. And Friends of Reservoirs is an organization that you could join as an angling group. So Serious Angler could have a Friends of Reservoirs chapter. And what y'all would be working towards is raising funds, applying for matching grants to do habitat work at a local reservoir. You would have a partner biologist within the state that would help identify the needs of the fishery, help you apply for the grants, and then you would be awarded grants based on the need of your project, and you can improve your local fisheries and work with professionals who understand what needs to be done. So Gary, super generous of you to offer a fishing trip anywhere in this country with the winter. I look forward to seeing who it is in April and seeing if I can sneak onto that trip myself.
Well, I'm going to be real curious to see where I have to go.
They're going to send you the north side of Maine. That's where they're going to send you a real long hike.
I'll go.
Exactly. So
we're in the United States. I'll take them fishing.
Perfect.
So we'll talk about the sweepstakes again on this podcast, as we get closer to April. But the question I had for you, Gary, I want to go back just a few seconds. You said that you want to spend the latter part of your career ensuring that the next generation gets to fish those fisheries and have those experiences that you've had in the past. And I think that you've done one thing that most anglers can't say that they've done. You, in 2019, caught and certified a Texas Toyota share lunker fish. You donated it to the Texas Parks and Wildlife, and they spawned that fish. And those offspring went into the first new lake in the last 20 years, new reservoir in the state, and it's Bodark Lake. And because of the technology that Texas Parks and Wildlife has, an angler can catch a fish at Bodark Lake. They can take a scale and send that to Texas Parks and Wildlife, and they can honestly find out if they caught one of those offspring that Gary Klein's share lunker. And you really have, by donating that fish, you really have built in that process to where anglers can experience a better fishery because of Gary Klein, and they can have proof that they did it.
It's pretty awesome. Connecting the dots.
It really is. I keep joking with Parks and Wildlife that at some point Major League Fishing will come to town, and we're going to fish Bodark, and we will have anglers that certify fish, maybe into the share lunker program, and we will have genetic certification that the co-founder of Major League Fishing helped create this fishery, and that's pretty cool.
That's cool.
Pretty sweet. I'm going to be there for a week at the beginning of March. So if there's
Bailey's going to catch some of your fish.
You will.
After your fish, Gary.
And you fished Bodark this year, correct, Gary?
Yeah, I spent a day on Bodark. Cool little lake.
Don't tell Bailey too much.
Well, typical new reservoir. It's not that big. It's kind of slopey, and it's got a gazillion bushes. Kind of reminds me of a Mexico lake. All the standing bushy type stuff. And the above the bridge, they just cleared a boat lane. The timber is so thick up the bridge you cannot physically get your boat to the bank.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Bailey fished out a kayak. He's coming from the bank.
Hey, a kayak would be awesome up there. And that right there might be your next favorite place to go, because you can launch right there at the ramp, go around the corner, and get in the timber and never see a boat if you're on a kayak. Yeah.
So you're saying I'm going to be downloading Zillow and trying to find a house nearby once I go fish that.
Yeah. Yep, you'll be a Texan, Bailey. If we've done anything with the podcast, we got one new Texan. That's a win.
Yeah, it's a win.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing I want to tell us quick too before we move on, Steve, is so when you guys are talking about the Friends of Reservoirs, what I'll do for anybody that's listening, that'll all be in the show notes for you guys too. So you can go down in the description and click on that website and see exactly what they were talking about there. So I just wanted to add that note for anybody that's listening.
Well,
That's
thank
why
you.
we.
And it's free. It's no charge to the winner.
Awesome.
Sweet.
Awesome, Gary. Well, tell us the fishing story. Tell us about catching. I mean, I know that was your personal best fish. Tell us about catching that fish.
Well, you were there. You were actually in the boat with me. And we were on a lake in Texas, and we were there with Texas Parks and Wildlife. We had Kyle was there at the Cheryl Lunker truck, and we had other anglers fishing this water body, and we were trying to move the genetics from that lake to the fish hatchery, and we were trying to catch an 8 or bigger. It was in February, cold, and the first day fishing was phenomenal. I think Stephen and I we were trying to catch 100 before it got dark, and I think we ended up with 97
Right.
and a lot of beautiful fish. Stephen caught the biggest fish of the day. It was like a 6-pounder. But out of all of the anglers, nobody brought in an 8-pounder. So we had no fish in the Cheryl Lunker truck. We went back to the hotel rooms, and then that night, a northern blew in. And when we woke up the next morning, it was like 20 to 30 out of the north, and it was sleet. And nobody went fishing except for Stephen and I. We got us a cup of coffee, drove out, and the day before, this one area, I was catching a lot of fish deep, 20, 25, just 4 or 5 pounders on a drop shot. Spinning rod, 6-pound test line. That was a lot of fun. So when Stephen launched me that morning, I went out and metered over that one school of fish while he was parking the truck, and they were gone, totally gone. The bottom was bare, but the deeper I went, those fish had slid out to 30. And I threw a mark on them on my Lowrance and then picked Stephen up at the dock, and then we went and fished shallow. There was a big bay up there that was nothing but just hydrilla. And we were throwing, the slobber knocker and a red lipless, typical Texas baits at that time of the year. And we were catching fire out of them. But I think we had a bunch of 4, 5-pounders. And I was getting cold, and it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. And before we put the boat on the trailer, I went back out to that school. And I said, well, let's just go over here for a minute. And I positioned the boat shallow and threw out deep. And when I pulled into that fish, it started running line, came up on the surface, and literally Stephen is taking his gloves off, going for his phone to call Kyle and say, Gary's got a Cheryl Lunker, bring the truck down here. He's got a big one on. And I look at Steve and I go, look, I'm throwing a spinning rod and 6-pound test line. I have a number 1 Berkeley drop shot hook on, and that fish is way out there. There's probably no chance I'm going to land the fish. So anyhow, we landed the fish. And when I finally got her up to the top, Stephen rolled over. I didn't have a net in the boat. He rolled over and he put 2 hands in her mouth, and he rolled over on my rod locker, and the hook was right in the tooth patch, and it just fell out.
That's awesome.
And then he's asking me, well, how big do you think it is? And I said, dude, I've never seen one that big. She's big.
That's awesome.
It's one of the best fishing stories, I think, because it proves that I had more confidence in Gary Klein than he has in himself.
Well, I just know a lot happens.
Also,
nothing happens.
We got real fortunate, but she weighed 1379.
Sheesh.
30 feet of water on a spinning rod with 6-pound test. It was pretty
Another
cool.
reason why you always go fishing when it's nasty out.
Well, yeah, if you think about it, all my travels across this country, I've caught so many big fish and stringers, heavy line and this and that. My 3 personal best, spotted bass, largemouth, and smallmouth, have all come on a spinning rod and 6-pound test line.
Oh my gosh.
The master of the flip stick, and this is what we do.
Berkeley 100% on all 3 of those fish.
You're not helping the brand of flipping, Gary.
Oh, I still flip a lot, but I've never caught a teenager flipping.
Yeah.
I've caught a bunch of big ones, but they're just 10, 11 pounders. She was so big, she was a freak. Yeah, awesome. a big freak. But no, that's the part of fishing that I enjoy is the challenge. And Bailey, it's like you said, that's always good when the weather's bad. A lot of our anglers are real quick to come up with an excuse or be a negative. and Stephen knows this because he's around me all the time, I'm not a negative person. I always try to make things positive. The wind's blowing, it's going to create current, and I'm going to catch fish doing this. Or if the cloud cover comes in, I'm going to change and catch them doing this. I just enjoy the challenge. The actual fighting of the fish on a rod and reel, not so much. My deal is the hunt. I love to figure them out, make the cast, and feel the bite. I mean, if I got the bite, I hand the rod to somebody else. I've reeled in quite a few fish in my career. I enjoy, and if I find a group of fish, I don't necessarily like to try to catch every one of them. I'll get bit a couple times, pick trolling motor up, and go try to find another group based on what I just learned.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that you can keep pushing yourself as an angler. And one of the things I see with anglers that have a lot of longevity in this sport, you used to be able to survive when you were a one-dimensional angler. This is the way I fish, and that's, I fish a jig all the time, or I fish topwater all the time, or I throw spinnerbait all the time. That's great. They're awesome tools for catching fish, but you can't be consistent with one bait, one technique on all these different water bodies 12 months out of the year. So it forces you as an angler to educate yourself, spend a lot of time on the water, trial and error, practicing. And back when I was learning, there was no internet. There was no magazines. It was all trial and error. And I kind of grew up with the phrase, if something works for me, why change? But when it fails, study it, understand it, learn it, correct it, and I never have to think about it again. And it's very easy when you take a look at fishing knots. There's 3 fishing knots that I tie. They're the best knots out there. I've tested them on all the lines that I use, so I don't have to worry about how to learn another line. And you can do that with hooks, points, everything. So
Right.
always keep an open mind.
I love it.
Yeah. This passion, man. Okay. One last question. You've got a big schedule this year. You're fishing the Bass Pro Tour again. And we've got 5 habitat projects. We're going to be doing a lot of things around events. But what event are you looking forward to the most? Where are we going that you're excited about?
Well, I'm actually excited about all the events. You take a look at me as an angler, I can't get focused on one event. And if anybody was to ask me, what's my favorite water body? My favorite water body is the water body that I'm fishing at the time. So in a couple of weeks, it's going to be Lake Conroe. In a week after that, it's going to be Harris. And a week after that, it's going to be Toho. And then off to, North Carolina. All of these lakes now, over the course of my career, I've got a lot of time on them. Not current time, but I know the lay of the lake. But with the understanding that things are always evolving and changing, that's the part that you have to study. And now with the internet, I can Google a bass fishing tournament on Conroe. And I can look at all the latest stuff. And that gives you an idea of what you need to catch to be competitive. So I do a lot of homework, a lot of study before I even get to the lakes, like all of our guys. To compete against this group, these guys, most individuals don't understand the amount of work and prep time that our anglers put forth to that event, to the season, for the whole year. There's probably guys that we have in our group that's already been to half the lakes that are on the schedule, just breaking their boats in, running around, looking, trying to get a feel for how things are going to set up in a couple months. A lot of work goes into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Gary,
Steve?
thank you so much, brother. As always, it is such a pleasure. You and I get to do this all the time. I'm glad that you let the Serious Angler crew join in on our conversation. This is like every single Monday night whenever I call Gary Klein on the phone and we chat for an hour and we go, oh man, we told each other the same stories we always tell each other over and over. This is just our life when we're traveling together. I'm going to have you on a number of times, Gary. We've got so many things to talk about throughout the year. Just really thank you for your friendship and your mentorship and what you're doing for this fishing community. From all of us, we really appreciate you.
Believe me, I appreciate it a bunch. But yeah, you and I could cover so many different topics, especially when you start getting into the rod, reels, and lines and lures and all that bit. But what I want to say though is thank you, Bailey, because a podcast like this with an individual like Stephen, there's so much information that he has, and he's so good at teaching it. I think the people need to tune in and really, if you want to, learn, if you want to just get outside of the fishing, the actual fish catching part of it, and start understanding water bodies and how everything's connected. I mean, the information is endless. Thank you.
Could not agree more. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is a treat, honestly, for me to be a part of it. And again, appreciate you guys letting the Serious Angler crew, a crew of goons, if you will, help help echo the knowledge that are coming out of your guys' mouths right now. It's been an awesome show, and looking forward to many more shows with you, Gary. And it's been a pleasure to not only fish with you, but now to get to sit on more podcasts with you is going to be awesome to hear the stories and more knowledge that everybody listening and tuning in can take advantage of.
Well, hopefully I will become the fishing nerd. Okay.
Yeah,
There you go.
I want that title.
Love it. Here we go. Sweet.
All right, Gary. I'll talk to you soon, brother. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, man. Have a good time down there. I wish I was down there with you.
Yeah, I've got Baby Klein here, Canyon. She's going to be with us this week, and once again at that Fisheries conference. It's always a family affair when the Kleins are around, though. She's going to come back and tell you all the great things she learned as well.
Well, awesome.
Heck yeah.
I sure appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
There you have it, man. Episode 1. Episode 1's in the book.
It.
Yeah.
You think anybody made it to the end?
I think for sure. Made it to you. I mean, if there's one thing that anglers love more than some of the talk around the fisheries biology, the management, the things of that nature, they love a fishing story. And Gary is one of the best fishing storytellers I've ever been around. So it's people are for sure sticking around. And I think they're excited to hear that he's this is not his last episode of the Real Biology. He's going to be on here. So we got many more to come, and more stories to tell, but a lot more knowledge to be presented. And this kicks everything off, man. The Real Biology, every other 2 weeks, bi-weekly episode, they're going to be able to come here and with you leading the helm. And yeah, man, what else do you think is coming up down the line that people have to look forward to?
I'm going to bring on true scientists, and we're gonna get nerdy. We're gonna get super nerdy, but we're also gonna learn things like how do we grow monster bass? How do we grow double digits? And not just in Texas. We'll get outside of Texas and we'll learn how to do it across the country. We're also going to learn what are the true challenges that a fisheries professional has in their career and in their fisheries. It is not always obvious what the challenges are, and a lot of times from the English perspective, they're not things that we can actually see, and that makes them hard to understand. So we're going to learn those things, and then Gary's not the only angler I know. There will be some pretty amazing anglers that are going to come join the show, and we're going to get to ask them the same questions. We're going to dive into how to do fish care better. We're going to figure that out, and we're going to get it from the perspective of the professionals that are doing it and from the scientists that are doing the research on it. The show has so many directions we can go, Bailey. Hopefully, it's not just my ideas. I can't wait for this community to join us on the Lake Hotline to ask questions. Some of those questions are going to produce shows. There's just no way to answer some of their questions without finding a professional that does it every day to talk about it.
And you nailed it, is one of the things that excites me most about, especially with this segment, Real Biology. I mean, this could be a 5-episode per week, every week show if we really wanted to make it that. But it's one where there's only so many ways you can rig a Ned rig or a Texas rig or tie a knot. This is an endless conversation with updating data, changing landscapes of fishery. Like there's always going to be new and relevant information to be talked about, and different perspectives, different states, different environments. So I think we're just now finally opening up that can of worms to make this a legit thing going forward. And I'm stoked to see where this thing goes.
I think about the founder of AFTCO, Bill Shedd, and something he said at one of the first ASA conferences I went to. Bill Shedd said whenever his family, they used to own SeaWorld, they sold SeaWorld, they built AFTCO, they give a lot to conservation. And one of the things Bill Shedd said was his family in using the coastal fisheries conservation is easy, but using their platform in freshwater is very difficult because a lot of our issues are local fisheries issues. And what you just said about multiple biologists from multiple states looking at the same thing and coming out with different outcomes, that's because it's all local issues. So whenever we say there's a ton of topics, there's a ton of ways to look at it, that's exactly what the show is going to tackle.
Heck yeah. Well, buddy, is there anything else the folks need to know before we wrap this sucker up?
Nope. We'll see you soon. Real Biology. We'll have the Lake Hotline email address. Please send us your questions.
Yeah. We'll do too is for our pal Steve here, his social media will be down below. Make sure you guys are following along with him. Tune into the Serious Angler social media as well. We'll be posting some clips and some highlights from each show. And make sure you guys are here every other Monday. We'll be having the podcast up on multiple different platforms, but here on MP3, YouTube, and looking forward to the next 2 weeks, man, the next episode of Real Biology.
Thanks, Bailey. See you soon.
All right, folks. Appreciate y'all. We'll see you on the next one.